So what I want to look at on the front here, let's just put the head aside for the moment and look at the torso. Okay, so let's just start with our traditional lay-in. And everybody's a little different. If you notice on our model here, it has such just great shapes up there. Is the rib cage and the waist blend together beautifully. Now over here, we've got a little bit of the articulation. You see a little bit of that rib cage separating out, but the whole structure is this nice tube. And so just pick a simple yet characteristic shape, as simple as possible so you have control over it, so you can get it down quickly, so you can redesign it simply if you want to, which is where we'll get to eventually. And so you can articulate it too. I can move it and animate it. I can tip it over. I can do a series of drawings for the animation. But do simple, but not just generic, characteristic of what we see. And we're going to have to approach this from a few standpoints here. So let's just look at this section now. If we look at the rib cage, so here's the rib cage here. Okay, so that's the rib cage there, and this can flow around this way, and there's all sorts of variations. But notice it's quite narrow here and quite wide. In fact, the rib cage is waist wide in terms of construction. And then you can dig a little out. If it's an hourglass figure, you can pack a little extra if it's got the love handles. But think of it as a waist wide tube. Sits in there. We're underneath it because he's up on that stand for the most part. And what I like to do is think of that rib cage as a Coke bottle. That's taking the anatomy of the ribs and fitting it, the bone structure of the rib cage, fitting it into the bone and muscle structure of the neck. And you can see how by thinking of the Coke bottle, we're drawing through that shoulder girdle interruption. Because one of the big problems of drawing the figure is head to shoulders. The contour takes us from the head out to the arms, to the littlest structures. We want to work these three big structures, head, ribcage, and pelvis, and have those work in harmony and in dynamic gesture together. So this is a great way to set that up. And then later we'll attach our shoulder girdle on top as we're about to. Now, for a second here, let's think of this as a box. If I were to turn this into a box, we're now going to go ahead and float the nipples on there. Something like that, let's say. Notice if we went from the sides across to the nipple, we'd notice this kind of box logic. The nipples create an excellent corner. We think of this as kind of a cigarette pack. That kind of shape. The nipples become corners to that. And so if you look at it and it feels too fat, bring it in, or it can be a more sophisticated shape. It can be, doesn't have to be right angle box. It can be beveled out in some way or another. So there it is there. The reason that box idea is important is, here's what happens. When we get into these three-quarter views and we're underneath or on top of that rib cage, we tend to think of the rib cage as just a cylinder. And that's not a bad conception if we're straight on or more or less in a facing position, but it's a front view or back view. that works fine and it doesn't really cause us any issue. But when we get into more dynamic positions, it'll actually screw us up. And here's the reason. If we were to look at a rib cage of a quadruped, say a cat or a dog or something like that, we'd find that the rib cage is very wide. Looking at it, here's the hip bone. This is their elbow, their knee. Oops, get an extra minute like that. Knee coming down this way. The shoulder blade, like that. So that would be the neck, the cute little ears. So we see that cat or dog very wide here. If we look down on top of it, we'd see that that rib cage of our cute kitty or puppy dog or lion is very narrow from side to side, or if we're looking on top of it, like so. If we were to look at a gorilla or a monkey, a knuckle walker, we'd see the rib cage is a certain width from the side. And if we looked on top of it, we'd see it was the same width from the top. It's as wide as it is deep. But for us, if we look at our rib cage from the front or back, now that we're upright, quadruped, the tabletop, knuckle walker, it's an incline, biped is straight up and down, least efficient structure in a lot of ways. Nice and wide side to side, just like the knuckle walker is. And let's put him side to side this way. Our gorilla. Side to side, we're both nice and wide. But if you look at us from a profile now, you'll find that rib cage is very narrow. Or let's look at it from the top. Here's the head. Here's the ears. Here'd be the shoulders out here. Here's the rib cage. Look at how narrow that rib cage is from side to side on top. And then we have the feet down here, like so. The reason for that is look at our support system. We've got a head, torso, and legs. And look at how we can kick those legs out side to side for a very stable pose, like that. So side to side, we're nice and wide because we can get a nice wide stance. But from front to back, look what happens. We have a very narrow base front to back. So if we had a very wide top, we're going to end up doing this. It's going to be very tippy. It's going to fall over easily. So we've got those feet trying to help out. They fly out. We've got the arch, kind of a flying buttress system like on a church in effect. And so that gives us a little wider stance, but we still have a exceptionally narrow support system there. And so we want to be very narrow front to back so we don't add to that instability. And in fact, since we have these long pillars that are attached on these side connecting pivot points, as we've found, we can easily correct that problem by kicking this back and or pushing this forward. And now we've solved that problem. And that's actually the strategy of most athletes, because an athlete wants to be very stable when they need to be stable and very explosive when they need to be explosive. A boxer, a football player, that kind of thing. So you got the head in here, the rib cage doing this, and then that athlete's going to take a very wide stance and force this foot forward and keep a very wide stance and force this foot back to exaggerate it. And notice that we're doing this. We put this footprint here and we put this footprint here, oftentimes splaying it out even to widen it out. And also there's a push off for propulsion. And we're doing this, which is nice and stable because it's wide this way and wide that way. The only place it's not wide is this way, but they're planning to move this way and meet the obstructions, the opposition. They want to hold the line here and have momentum pushing off that foot, and again force to meet the obstructions that way. The only place they don't have a good balance is that way, and in fact that's the direction most knockouts in boxing happen. Is they get a flash knockout, the punch comes this way, a left hook in this case, or a roundhouse kick. I do a lot of those. I'll show you that the third day, my roundhouse kicks. No, I can't roundhouse at all. And that's the only weak spot. But this creates the most stability. And of course, a football player then will be a knuckle walker in effect. And so they bring the one or two, usually one arm down to create a triangle of support. And then they've moved their center of gravity inside that. When we get these 3/4 views of the rib cage and we're underneath, from underneath, so what we want to do is we want to create a structure that's wide across and narrow on the side. Nipples acting at or near the corners, depending on how refined you're going to do. But think of those nipples as the corner structure, like that. So here, like that, or a flattened cylinder. Notice what happens if I try and draw this and don't pay attention, just do a cylinder. Here is this, here is this. Oftentimes I'll end up lowering that nipple there when it should have been higher. And notice the more extreme the perspective, the more danger that creates. So I like to keep that slightly squarish there. Or again, just use those construction lines and don't let it fall down, lift it up. All right, so that's that. Now, what we're going to find, the pectoralis muscles. And I'll show you this on a demo with our model here in a little bit. Demonstration. I'll go up there and show you. It doesn't look like it sometimes. arms, in some arm positions. Let's put this arm in here. But what we want to feel is that the pecs, the chest muscles, come down the breastbone. They attach down the breastbone. Right down there, the blade of that sternum. So this is all attachment here. They attach over the rib cage. Do this here. They're going to attach down the breastbone. I'm going to keep it spaced wide so we can see that. Usually doesn't separate that wide. And it's going to go over the rib cage. So that means if you're underneath the rib cage, we're going to want to feel that pectoralis roll off the sternum because it's a rounded form, but then track at least for a little while right over the architecture of that greater form. The little detail, the little structures always have to track over the top and be affected by the bigger structures. So when you draw an eyeball, it's on the greater cheek structure. You've got to respect that structure and position of the bigger cheeks to understand and for your eyes to ring true. So we want that chest in some manner to connect across. And then once it hits roughly where the nipples are again, those are important landmarks, it detaches from the rib cage and takes off for the arm. And I'll show you the attachment of the arm in a little bit. And if the arm goes way up, then the attachment's going to go way up. If the arm stretches out, the attachment is going to be dragged out. And I'll show you the other articulations a little bit later. But we want to feel that. Now again, I'll show you this exactly carefully with the model here in a few minutes when we're towards the end of this set. The third, let's do that. So attachment, all attached to the rib cage, the sternum, the center line of the rib cage, or the ribs themselves, tracking over, and I'll show you that tracking in a second. Once it gets underneath the nipple, more or less, it takes off. And so this structure is on top of and detached, overlapping but detaching on the ribs. The ribs are coming in here. Ribs are coming in here.